Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Smith, and I'm the lead for EAUC in the Higher Education Academy. And I'd like to welcome you here on behalf of the organisations represented on the screen there. I'd like to start with just some usual housekeeping things. If you haven't found them yet, there's toilets just outside the door here, and just in reception. If you're going upstairs to the art gallery, there aren't any up there, so you know that. Fire exits are clearly signed, and there are no tests today planned. So if you do hear the fire alarm, could you please evacuate the building, and meeting place is on the left-hand side of the car park out here. As you know, there's three. Yes, could you please make sure you turn off all mobile phones, or at least put them on the silent mode. Thanks for that reminder. Parallel sessions. The Holistic Sustainability in St Andrews for an ER is going to be next door in the Key Suite. Higher Education Academy Working Projects, Dr. Simon Steiner is going to be upstairs in the art gallery. You can either get up there through the while the lift's just towards reception, or there are stairs opposite the reception desk. And the other parallel session, Developing Sustainable Literacy, for that will be in here. So both before and after lunch, those sessions will be in those rooms, and we'll put something on the board to remind you just before that. We're very pleased to see such a large number here today. I believe that there is another similar sized number who couldn't make it today, who are going to be, who said they want to be active on the network list. We've provided this document which gives you the details of people who are and some who aren't here today, so that if you see people with whom you feel it's particularly useful to network with or discuss things with, then we provided that resource, and we hope to be able to, as one of the outcomes of today's event, to kind of build up networks within Scotland on sustainability in higher education. I think that the very fact that there is such a broad type of delegate here today as well, in terms of people from the State departments, people from academic departments, and people from other agencies within Scotland, kind of tells us that sustainability is touching many different areas of higher education in many different disciplines. And I think a lot of these kind of, we need to recognise these different areas, but I think one of the things that we really want to do is to try and think about how we can bring these together. And this is one of the reasons for this event, and one of the reasons for this network. So we know that there is quite a lot of good practice out there, but that's often quite isolated, people working on their own sometimes. But also, there's good evidence that higher education institutions are now bringing the different areas of sustainability together, whether it be in estates, student support, or in learning and teaching. So that's one of the things we want to look at today. And then, as I say, from that, one of the main outcomes will hopefully be to think about how we can better network with each other and better work in a holistic way. So I'll leave that as introductions now, and I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, who's Jan Bevington, who's Professor of Accountancy and Sustainable Development at the University of St Andrews. Her research interests are social and environmental accounting, and sustainable development and organisational change. And she's also the Vice Chair of the Sustainable Development Commission. So please welcome Jan Bevington.
Thank you very much. This is quite a daunting conference to come and speak at, because you guys know as much as I do about this area. So my job is just to warm you up today and hopefully get some of the things that we all think about in our daily working lives into your minds, so that we have a really productive networking day and look at a whole variety of things together. I'd just like to start by telling you a little bit about the organisation I work for, the Sustainable Development Commission. This is a day-a-week post. Well, people they talk about it, so it's a little bit larger than that, but I knew they were lying at the time, so that's all right. We're an independent advisory body to the UK government and all its guises, both the UK government in Westminster, but then also all the devolved governments as well. We're quite often described as a government's critical friend, and so it's quite it's not a knife edge post in a way, and that we sit alongside the government and try to help them when they're wanting to make moves in sustainable development, and then we take a couple of steps back and say whether or not we thought that was good enough at some stage. So it's got a watchdog role as well as an advocacy role within government. We then also have a broader advocacy role looking outwards as well, and speaking at all sorts of events and trying to help civil society and all groups within society actually get to grips with this agenda. So it's a very exciting place to work. Our chair is Jonathan Porritt, who will be well known to you all in this room, and then the Commission are a group of 19 people that have this very part-time commitment, and then we have over 50 staff in offices throughout the UK. And we have Shivani here, who's out in our Scottish office, who looks after education within Scotland, so she's joined us today as well. So she doesn't work, I get to do the talk. Okay, so it looks a really nicely division of duties. In Scotland, Hugh Raven is the other commissioner. He works for most of his time for the Soil Association in Scotland. He's their chair, and then we have this fine, strong secretariat. The kind of things that we've got on the stocks, just to give you a sense of the kind of things we look at, is we're doing a tidal review at the moment that will be published in the next 2 or 3 months, which looks at the possibility for tidal stream energy as well as tidal range energy production. We're doing a review of supermarkets, the role of supermarkets in either fostering or encouraging sustainable development, most of the latter, as you might imagine. And we're also looking at the role of Ofgem and various other regulators and how their structures and their way they're set up either inhibit or encourage sustainable development. So it's quite a wide-ranging role, but we also have an education element to that, which to date is basically focused on school education as opposed to further and higher education, but it's slowly expanding out to look at those other things as well. So that's enough about the organisation. This framework will be very familiar to you. It's the UK's Framework for Sustainable Development. It's a very interesting framework because it's so different from the previous one, with those 2 key outcomes that we're looking for. Basically, we want to live in a strong, healthy and just society that doesn't undermine its environmental basis on which it was created. And then you've got those 3 enablers that run through the bottom. So nothing surprising there. In terms of the kind of work that we do, though, it's infused all over this picture. In terms of living within our environmental limits, the basic science and the understanding of what those limits are and what is the state of the current world is the business of geoscience, of chemists, of physics, of geographers, of all sorts of disciplines, but also the social sciences as well, in terms of actually understanding how people do choose to live in particular ways and how we might encourage them to live differently. In terms of ensuring a strong, healthy and just society, well, we've got psychology, sociology, philosophy, ethics, and all the humanities, and actually thinking about some of those issues, about what kind of society do we want to live in, what will it look like in the future as opposed to what it looks like now, what is the role of consumerism in a sustainable future, for example. Likewise, on the bottom line, again, our disciplines are infused within here, achieving a sustainable economy, but you've got economics, accounting, finance, management, and other disciplines of that sort. We've got the law in there, and the study of how we might actually have good governance, and what would good governance mean, both in terms of how you might constitute your government systems with parliaments, etc., but also how you might go through people's actions and behaviour and how they interact and communicate around sustainable development. We've got history, theology, politics, the whole lot. So the kind of things that are our bread and butter and the bread and butter of our colleagues are also infused all over this framework and need to be brought to bear on the whole framework as well. And of course, using sound science responsibly is one of the big challenges, particularly for the media between yourself and the world, but also the knowledge transfer agenda, which is coming in stronger and stronger within further and higher education, about how you take things from the lab or the classroom or whatever and take it out through into influencing people's behaviour in communities and businesses and government and whatever. So this is very much our bread and butter, and in some ways just puts a different frame in and around the kind of things that we've been doing already. The other challenge for us is then to be able to become more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and they also talk about transdisciplinarity, which I can't begin to understand, but it's sort of like beyond the rest. And so it's the ability to talk to each other within our various silos and find the common ground, to find out what way can we help each other solve these problems that people are wanting to solve. So the 5 principles and the 5 principles framework is very, very important to how we go about doing our jobs as well. In terms of what I want to talk about today, really just to start things off, is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Funding Council, and just very briefly, and talk briefly about the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development as well. But I really want to focus on the last two bits in a little more depth, and it's not just what you teach, it's also how you teach. So we have a wee bit of pedagogy in there as well. And then finally have a very brief look at the life of the university, and predictably it's my own institution, St Andrews, and to look at how we're trying to incorporate sustainable development into the heart of what we do. So I'm not going to talk about that too much, because I know Roddy's going to be talking about some of those things as well. So I know we haven't consulted, but I promise I haven't done anything dreadful with regard to the report. So in terms of the Funding Council, Funding Council mission is reasonably straightforward, as you can see, but then you can see it has required by statute, which is quite handy because it is by statute to have regard to the following things. And sustainable development is in there. So in terms of actually having a statutory duty to think about this item, it's in there within the requirements. But sustainable development is also infused throughout the rest as well. You think about the kind of things, skills, needs in Scotland. Well, to have sustainable development literate citizens has got to be one of the key skill needs going forward in time. So that certainly would fit within the remit of the kind of work that we do in our own institutions. The education related to students and potential students. A few things we're going to maybe educate, in my case, accountants, although I don't educate any accountants anymore, which is, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's just the way it is. A few things we're going to have accountants, we're going to have managers, people in charge of businesses. If they've never heard of sustainable development, then we're failing in our duty to educate them, but also we're not like to get any sort of transformations or transitions without everyone actually being very aware of how this agenda affects their professional lives and their workplace lives and those sorts of things. The other thing as well, they need to have, required by statute, to have regard to issues affecting the economy of Scotland. Stern makes it very clear that, particularly with regard to climate change, that if we don't actually address that in a very fast and sort of furious kind of way, then we're facing economic suicide of proportions that minor structural adjustments look nothing compared to what we're going to trigger if we don't deal with climate change in a very comprehensive manner. So in that respect, that obviously affects that particular item. But it's not just climate change, because there isn't a way that climate change is a very dominating part of that agenda. But you only need to look at communities in Scotland and think about livelihoods through fishing, and then loss of livelihoods through overfishing, or changes in regulations and what you can catch and all those sorts of things, to realise that that's hugely important for people's livelihoods, particularly around this part of Scotland, but other parts of Scotland as well. So I would argue that the Funding Council's SD agenda and what they're required to have regard to by statute is again infuses these two things together. They're not separate. It's not somehow we've got this one item in the line. Our agenda spreads out throughout all of those items. In terms of the other relevant policy context, the two sort of main ones the Scottish see, of course, is the Scottish Sustainable Development Strategy, and it has a variety of commitments within that to do with education. You can track the extent to which these commitments are being dealt with online, because there's it's a really tedious spreadsheet, but quite helpful spreadsheet that goes each one of the commitments on a timeline, and it even out far in has a civil servant whose job it is to do it, along with their email address, which I think is an innovation that frightened the hell out of civil servants in the first instance. It frightened the hell out of me, it was my name, an email address on the far side. So you can track through what's going on with the one element of it. But one of the things that Scotland has done, which I think is a really helpful thing, is that they've put together the first, and it is the first, not the last, but the first action plan on taking the UN Decade for Education for Sustainable Development and Equality. Now again, a lot of that is based around eco-schools, because in Scotland we have something like 80% of our primary schools are signed up onto the eco-schools program, which is the highest in the world. For some reason, well, for two reasons. It's kind of captured people's imagination, and once you get a critical mass of people doing things, and more people join in and do it, and it's sort of like, we're not an eco-school, we're just a surprise kind of thing. So if only eco-university let it catch on for the same sort of reasons. But also the grant letter to schools, they were asked, are you an eco-school? Then will you become an eco-school? Which is actually one of the driving factors for getting some of these things going. So in that respect, at the primary school level, Scotland is very well endowed with a set of practices and a set of expectations about it. And then And I sort of worry about this in a way, and it kind of is natural. It then kind of thins out the more you go on with your schooling. And my worry about that is we say to youngsters when they're very young and they come to education for the first time, this is what the world's like, this is what you need to do. Then they go to secondary school and say, concentrate on your exams, okay, get on with that. Then they come to university and they say, you're in the real world now, forget it. And so what I'd like to see, and I think what will happen, is a gradual infusing of that sort of eco-school agenda and thinking throughout the rest of the education system as well. It's not cascaded thoroughly, but it has at least started. And in terms of the staff, these 3 action points below here are the action points that are within the UE decade that relate specifically to further higher education. And they cover basically teaching, research, and managing ourselves. So they're very much those core 3 activities that a lot of you are going to spend your time doing. This is the first action plan. There will be more action plans. So this, if you like, was very much the expectation that this was the first marker. There is processes that say progress on these sorts of things, and then we'll be going forward, hopefully the next year to 18 months with a second plan to actually elaborate and pull out particular areas. And I mean, I hope the SDC will be helping facilitate that process of actually opening up and seeing, well, taking the first step, what are the next steps beyond that? In terms of how you teach, this is a personal passion of mine in terms of thinking about how we might go about educating. Because I don't know, I mean, you've got great degrees. The abiding memory of my undergraduate degree is desperately trying to stay awake. And I used to write everything down, and people used to think I was a great student because I had great notes, but the only reason I had great notes is I was trying to stay awake. I thought the best I can do is write down everything that's going on. Because it was the most tedious, boring degree I've ever encountered. It's better than ones we taught to our students when I used to work at Dundee and then at Aberdeen, but it was really, really boring. And the reason why it was boring, it was solely, I'm going to tell you, you save it in your mind and you tell me later on, and then you'll get some sort of pass and deem you to be educated in some way. I don't think it's a very creative way, and I don't think it actually works for understanding and knowing about the world. So my own teaching, I hope, I've got some of my students in the room, they might put their hands up and say, I'd like to dispute that, hopefully they won't, but is that my own way of thinking about teaching is to draw from someone called Ferreri. He was a South American who was into literacy training. And the way he went about his literacy training is that instead of teaching people how to read the way you and I maybe learned how to read, which is like the cat sat on the mat, look, here is the cat, look, here is the mat, look, cat is sitting on the mat. So he didn't teach people to read in that particular way. What he did is he made conversation circles with people who couldn't read and write, with one person who could. And he asked these people in a circle, what are your problems? What do you want to be able to read and write for? And somebody will say, well, the landlord keeps on taking the rent, but he never fixes my house. How do I get the landlord to attend to my needs? Or he might say, the well is always poisoned with pollution and it comes from the farmer. How do I talk to the local council to make sure the farmer doesn't pollute my well? So he taught them that language first. Didn't start with, the all sort of abstract language, said, where are you and what do you need to know? Of course, was imprisoned and then was exiled from his country shortly thereafter, because you don't want people to know those sorts of things, particularly if they're poor. And so in that respect, he would contrast these 2 approaches to teaching and to education. One is the banking, which is the deposit and return. I deposit something and you tell me it back. And at that point, there's a really incredible power relationship in that if you're in my class, I know everything, you know nothing. You just sit there, we open vessels, and I pour all my special knowledge in because I know everything. So it's got a really nasty sort of power connotation with it. Contrast that with dialogic teaching, which is basically saying, what do you want to know? And then from what you already know, how can we build that onto a greater base? So it doesn't mean that everyone is equally educated or everyone's equally knowledgeable about a topic, but the starting point is with the student, and the starting point then is about how do we build this knowledge together, not that how am I going to come and donate it to you, you lucky person. So it's quite a different kind of approach. And the idea behind praxis is then the action and reflection, theory and practice being incorporated together. And so right from the beginning, you try to get to that thing that we often find very difficult with our students is say, you've got all this book learning, you kind of know stuff about the world, you go and join it together, okay? Because we kind of hope that joining together somehow happens. But the joining together is, you can engineer it, but it's quite magical. It's something that happens in somebody else's head, not something that you can stir up and make happen yourself. So the kind of things that I think would work really well, and particularly in sustainable development, we've got really great real-world problems to deal with in that respect. We've certainly got that stuff in terms of the problems we're facing, is to actually infuse the curriculum with things that involve people doing things that they know something about. So even in the area of accounting education, where you think it might not be possible to do anything exciting, it is. And so, for example, my first year students, what I used to get them to do is to keep their own cash book for the first term at university. So I say, imagine you've got £10,000, okay? Thereafter, keep a cash book of all your income and your expenditure. And then I get them to do exercises like analyse what they spend their money on. Have they got good control of their cash? Did they get receipts and all those sorts of things? And I always remember, because these are the magic moments that you get as an educator, someone rushing up to me on campus saying, it balances, and what's more, I'm saving money. And then rushing off again. Now, if you can get your students, one, to save money, but also not to fritter their money, and to actually be able to buy books and all those sorts of things. Now, I think I've done, them and me a favour. So even with something that you think would be quite dry, cash books, like how do you record money in, money out, which ain't that interesting, believe me. Okay, you can actually engage people in the reality of that within their lives. Likewise, the kind of things that we've done with some of the students at St Andrews is we've had them create scenarios for sustainable Scotland for a 25-year period looking forward. There's lots of scenarios out there, so you can kind of see what scenarios look like, but do it for this place you're living in. Look at the data trends that we've got, what might we do because of that. Likewise, the second year students all did a social audit. So they chose one organisation they bought something from in the last 2 or 3 weeks and did an in-depth investigative analysis of how good that organisation is. Does it meet sound environmental standards? Does it have a good employment record, etc., etc.? I think some people chose to buy their things from somebody else after some of the work that they did on that. So it's somebody that they pay money to, and so you actually tie it into people's lives. I've also sometimes done household audits, so asked students, particularly in second year and beyond, to do environmental impact assessments of their household, and then to go for a 50% reduction over a period of time. Now, immediately always say teach after that organisational change, because students always go, my God, these organisations are dreadful. They don't do the things they ought to do. But if you teach this before it, they go, they're dreadful. They don't do what they ought to do. And I understand why. Because I've got people like me living in them, okay? So in that respect, this is what this kind of tends you towards, is that the case studies and those sorts of things tie you into real life. And that way you get engagement, and you also, hopefully in some cases, get change in students' lives as well. So I think that's really important, that what you do, how you do it matters as much as what you actually talk about. I just want to pop the slide up to give a wee bit of background to the undergraduate degree in Sustainable Development at St Andrews. It's an interdisciplinary degree, so it's taught within arts and science, and you have arts and science students working together a lot. It also has a humanities element within it. And just at honours, we have 50% of workers in SD topics, and these are mainly integrating cases, review essays, dissertations, those sorts of things. So they try to build them as certainly as very interlinked pieces of work, and a lot of group work within those kind of contexts, solo dissertations or solo dissertations. And then we ask students to take 50% in another subject, so they get the breadth and depth issues, but to bring that other subject to their SD studies, and actually, particularly the dissertations, to maybe do a dissertation drawing on their other subject within their SD studies. In terms of demand, if you're ever thinking, oh, should we do an SD degree? Is there demand? There's huge demand. At the moment, we're sitting at about, I think 77 was the last thing I've heard, but it's bound to increase in terms of applicants. We've got 10 full-time places available, and we have about 77 to 80 students wanting to apply for them. Our first year course and second year course, which is open to everyone, gets very healthy student numbers. Bearing in mind we're a small university, so these are big class sizes for the university of the size we are. We have 24 honours students going through at the moment. They're in junior honours. Our first graduation will be this time next year, which will be so exciting for everyone. And then there's all sorts of common subjects that's taught with. So this degrees in this are possible. We quite like the design of this, and so if anyone had any further questions, feel free to ask them later on. We also have Rahima White, who's our coordinator of our SD degree, is here as well, which is now looking at me that way. This is where I'm sitting my name. I want to also talk about this lastly, though, as the university as pedagogy, because at the end of the day, the university as an organisation is a way of actually teaching and engaging students in more broadly in the sustainable development agenda. And so we're kind of lucky at St Andrews in that the senior management team within the university has committed to this agenda and are very keen to see it develop and evolve. And they've tried out various things which have got some positive feedback, which then has further encouraged them to push on further. So certainly the league tables that were published last week about universities that got first and 2-1s and all those sorts of things is the start of some external pressure, I think, on all our institutions to actually think about where are you in that ranking. Are you doing well? Are you doing poorly or whatever? And so we're very relieved that we got first, because otherwise we would have been, quite tantrums, I suspect. So in terms of kind of things, all sorts of things that are going on there that we're involved in. So there's strategy, there's governance processes, and then there's various outcomes that we've managed to achieve. So fair trade status, working on having an ethical investment policy for the university. Got some green tourism awards for some buildings that operate very well. There's leadership lecture series, got data, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of things that aren't on those slides and they're on the agenda, but it's very hard to make sense of them because they're much harder questions. So I really want to leave you with a series of questions that we haven't got an answer to, because it relates to sustainable development, it relates to our practices together. So what's not there? What's not being addressed is casualisation of the academic workforce. That's a social sustainability issue in terms of how we actually treat our staff, and particularly serial long-term, short-term contracts rolling over. So fairness of pay and gender equity is on the agenda, but casualisation really isn't. We're not looking at patterns of student recruitment and saying, well, do we draw a physical line beyond which we won't bring students unless they come on their bikes? Okay. And higher education in Scotland is a huge export earner. And so we have this really big tension in that the government likes higher education, we like higher education. A lot of the income that comes to our institutions is through foreign overseas student fees. It's kind of where we can get any income rise because all the rest is capped. But with that comes a carbon cost. And I'm sure you could say, but the education you give them when they go back will mean that they're sustainable in their own countries. That's a fudge. Some of them might, but it's, but that's, that balance is hard to actually kind of sort out. So who we recruit into higher education matters enormously. And then there is the utter sacred cow, conferences. Ever been to a conference in Hawaii? Yes, we had to go to Hawaii. Okay. In 3 weeks' time, I'm going to a conference in Auckland, New Zealand. How good is that going to be? Now, what do we do at conferences? We basically drink and talk to each other, don't we? Because that's intellectual interchange. It's technical word for drinking and talking to each other. And so I think we need to start to figure out ways that we can actually get that, which is the outcome, which is seeing what papers are coming forward that are still 2 or 3 years off a journal, to see what people are thinking about in terms of the cutting edge, and to meet up with your mates to gossip about what papers you might write next. We all don't have to fly to Auckland to do that. We have to somehow figure out ways of doing that. And I've been involved in some e-conferences, and personally they don't work for me. Partly because I'm not very familiar with it, but partly if I'm doing an e-conference, I actually basically carry on working because I'm in my office, and I log on occasionally. Whereas if I was in my office and the only thing I did was log on and be at the e-conference, and I suspect it would work a damn lot better. Okay, so we've got lots of relearning and reimagining to do there if we're going to actually deal with the way we want to intellectually engage with people, but the way we do it at the moment is incredibly carbon intensive. And indeed, I know some conferences that organise themselves to be at really exotic locations because you increase the number of participants. Okay, conferences in Birmingham, apologies to everyone from Birmingham, don't do that well. Okay, I remember when I was Venice before and then Birmingham. The numbers changed significantly. It's also the idea that we want to bring students to a location to put them together with each other to interact and therefore to learn. Now there are many different models of doing that. The Open University is a very good example of a model that doesn't do that. But a lot of our institutions still believe in something really magical about bringing people together. Well, if we do that, we need to think about ways of dealing with the fact that people are coming in and then going away from that. Also, what subject shall we give up teaching? Personally, I vote for economics, but that's just my own prejudices, okay? But we're kind of very shy because of the academic freedom thing to say, see this topic, we have to change it entirely because it's now wrong. We don't believe in economic growth anymore. We believe in a sustainable economy. Now, we don't have differences yet, but we believe in slightly different things. But where do you, now that's really hard because that's sort of like sustainable development fascism, isn't it? Your topic, it's gone. We don't like it anymore. But it's difficult. So we have to start having some of those conversations about how we're going to teach what we teach. And then things like, do we insist, for example, that the first term at university, you all study sustainable development, and then after Christmas, you start on your topic area, because then you'll be literate enough to go forward. I don't think anyone's having that conversation. You might not want to for very, very sound and sensible reasons. So I think our university is a good example. We've got some awards that tell we're a good example, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're not even beginning to start to unpick about sustainable development agenda and how it's going to impact on higher education. But I think those issues are things that are going to have to be discussed going forward in time. Although, I mean, today might not be one of the times to do it, but actually there's some good questions about structurally how we organise our working environment. I think that's all I'm going to say. So, more than happy to field questions or observations, or, I mean, I'd much rather field observations to start the conversations for the rest of the conference. Wake up your neighbour, because you didn't ask the question now. Come on, let me see that. There you go.
You mentioned e-conferences and your own personal dislike of these events and so on. Can I ask, do you know of colleagues elsewhere in the world that were participating in that conference that actually found it useful?
I don't know, because it was just the one, and partly I didn't know a lot of the people I was interacting with, which was also part of the sort of discomfort. And it was a few years ago, whereas I think now I'd be much better at it because I've dialed into more meetings and got slightly more used to interacting in more diverse ways. But I don't think I'm getting kind of science. I don't think computer science.
I was going to say the REAP conference the other week, the re-engineering assessment practices was very successful. So I definitely would encourage you to go and have a look at that. It's reap.ac.uk. But I think that colleagues from, was it over 100 nations? Something like that.
600.
With various discussion forums, etc., that people could go and have real-time chats. But it very much was like you were saying, Dan, you've got to dedicate time to actually be there and get engaged. But there was evidence that did occur.
That's a good model to have looked at. There's some examples of that.
Sorry, this is a different topic. Do you want to carry on?
I don't know, does anyone want to contribute anything to that? And then Rahima.
Just there are a couple of the European projects where part of the research agenda has been to increase networking, and they've run some very successful e-conferences. I can't remember offhand what the link to it is, but I could send them into the organisers and they can put that out.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's very successful there is that there aren't actual presentations, but people send in sort of an A4's worth of documentation, but then there's a lot of email correspondence after that, which is monitored but not very strongly.
Yep.
And that correspondence is what generally sort of generates the positive outcomes of the conference, I think, rather than the initial article, which just tends to spark off conversation.
And certainly my sense of that, I mean, when I'm trying to sort of imagine what it would be like in my field, I could see having really quite active conversations with people I already knew. So you actually make a time to all somehow, you know, I've never used a chat room, it's constant old-fashioned and it's weird, but we'll come into a chat room and actually have the conversation. But again, as you say, step the time aside, because anything that happens in your office, of course, is very dangerous because there's, you know, all sorts of other things yelling at you and that's. Yeah.
Just briefly, the SD Commission, which I know you're a member of, how do you find the work we do with the email links from Sustainable Development Commission panel, which has now gone for its first year? Because that's been very time consuming if you try to do it even reasonably well, I think it's brilliantly, because there's so many big reports coming from government. But that's a form of e-communication. It's not a conference, I realise that. But being on the recipient's end, because you're on the commission, how have you found that? It's a bit of a leading question, because I know it's been assessed correctly.
Okay. As far as I understand it from hearing our people that run the panel and do the engagement-led work, I think they've been very impressed with the number of respondents they get, so it can actually get quite wide, you know, a huge number of people responding to things at different levels of depth, of course, depending on how much time they have to respond to them. And I think we find it very helpful in terms of advising government to actually have that bit of a broader perspective, because the worry is, particularly if you focus purely on policy wonks and you're in a very, very narrow set, then it's very easy to get quite convinced of a particular way of thinking, whereas this opens it out for us and actually provides a much broader spectrum. So I think if we've struggled, we've found that the spectrum of views that come back from it is so broad, it's difficult to synthesise and make sense of it.
Thank you.
No, sorry, because you were queuing before.
Yes, I wanted to refer back to the reference to Paulo Freire, which was great to see Paulo Freire up there. And fairly recently into academia from adult education background.
Right,
so
okay.
great. Now, the thing about Paulo Freire was that, you know, his book was called Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Yeah.
Now, I think as a class, I would probably be fair to say that accountancy students are not the oppressed. They may be oppressed amongst them, but as a class, they're possibly not oppressed. And I think, and I would say the same with, you know, my sociology students as well. There's a question about who are our students and to what extent the university is able to go out of its walls and actually engage with people who are engaged in social struggle for social justice and things like that. And now, I've been trying to do that, some of that, and a lot of the things that I've been come up against is the university that doesn't actually, it's not set up for that. And the reason why it's not set up for that is that there's a trend in the opposite direction, which is about marketization, it's about financial resources, it's about bureaucratization, about management, a certain form of managerialism. Pardon me. So, whilst we try and move in one direction, there are bigger forces, in a sense, pushing us in the other direction. Now, Paulo Freire was imprisoned and exiled. Perhaps we don't get imprisoned and exiled, but what we do is get marketized and casualized and things like that. So, it's you know, how do we work within this?
That's a huge, huge agenda, but one that I think, in terms of then actually coming right back, well, what is the role of the university within society? And I think it may be a good time to reopen that debate in the context of sustainable development, because you're right, who are our students? Are they the only people that front up to our doors in some way, shape or form, or is it all citizens of the world? And I think, when I was starting academia in New Zealand, there was an Act of Parliament that required the universities to be the critic and conscience of society. And it was made very clear to me when I joined academia that come the revolution, one of the costs of my current privilege is to stand up and be counted. Now, I recognise that that's not a huge sort of cultural thing within this country, but it is certainly within other countries. So that whole sense of what the university support, who do they speak on behalf of, and do they speak on behalf of citizens that don't have the opportunity to speak for themselves? And I would say that I would do that part as part of our mission as a university, but also as academics. But there is a wide disparity of views on that. But no, I'm with you in that particular context.
Andrea, I just have a very kind of basic question about your sustainable development degree. As a student, again, we both come from professions that are quite rigid in terms of what you're allowed to teach.
Yes.
But then at the end, there is an obvious career choice. Where are these people sort of, what are you marking the degree as in terms of employment prospects? Obviously, people want their lives to be sustainable as well. And then how do you find they're tailoring the course to meet those career objectives?
Two things. The first thing, we don't have any women jobs yet.
Yeah, I know.
So if you ask me 3 years' time, I can tell you where they went. Our expectation from talking to students and seeing where they're thinking of, a portion will go into further education. We have a relatively high proportion of Samantras who do that in any event, so there'll be sort of like that equal sort of training through it there. Some people are thinking about careers in business. We haven't quite managed to put them off yet. And so some people who have a strong sort of business management kind of background want to take this and actually go into maybe called social responsibility, those kind of roles within organisations. Other ones are looking at policy arenas, which again might require further study before they can enter policy arenas, but that's sort of a fairly logical one. Still others are going to take maybe 1 or 2 years out and do voluntary service abroad and actually go to the kind of countries that they've been studying. Indeed, a lot of them are away this summer in various countries on secondments to help organisations in developing countries do particular things. So I suspect we'll have a sort of a variety of that sort. It also depends where people's cognitive degree subjects are. So with SD in biology, who go into the conservation science movement, for example. With SD in chemistry, you might go into renewable energy. And so that's why we've kind of created the need to also have a grounding somewhere as well, because that's the other thing that I worry about, not about degree, but we worry about generally about interdisciplinarity, is that it becomes mushy and it's not got the rigour of any discipline. So we're very keen to keep that balance. So I'm saying as anyone should know where they're going to go, but that's our suspicion at the moment, and they're people sort of looking to hit themselves.
Can I make a brief observation on the back of that?
Yes.
which is, in the end, our professions are particular examples of it, but not the only ones by any means. Once they leave us, the squeezing process gets even narrower. And part of our real difficulty is, I was talking about it semi-joking, is making them unemployable, making our students thoroughly educated. They cannot go off and do law, cannot go off and do accounting, because their head just won't fit anymore. And I know how engineering in particular is trying to deal with this. But I think it's what happens to our students afterwards is yet another line.
In order to keep things in time, I think we're going to call that the last word, but I'm sure that this will stimulate hopefully debate among other people. And so I know some people are trying to catch fire. I'm sorry if we ran out of time, which is a good sign as well. Okay. Thank you.
When I was doing my housekeeping just then, I forgot the most important thing, that lunch will be in the Metro Cafe, which is out of these doors and to the left, just past the bar. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Dr. Stephen Sterling, who's the Schumacher Reader Education Sustainable Development at the University of Plymouth, and also Senior Advisor for Education Sustainable Development at the Higher Education Academy. He's going to be talking about the work of the Higher Education Academy project.
Good morning, everybody. I've got about 10 minutes to skip through a fairly factual account about the Higher Education Academy's ESD project. So this is actually our third networking day. We've done one in the East Midlands, one in the South West, now one in Scotland. So the standard slide about the Higher Education Academy itself, if you didn't know, it's an independent organisation largely funded by the funding councils and by HCIs, and it has an emphasis on student experience, and most of the work is done through the 24 subject centres. But before I get into the work of the project, I want to say a little about the concept, and I want to apologise for the next two pictures that are taken rapidly with my digital camera on Saturday at home. These are two ads from one issue. It did have to be the Guardian, I have to say. But it had 5 ads, sustainability ads, big ads. One from an NGO, Christian Aid, one from Marks and Spencer's, one from EasyJet for Poor People, saying how green they are, one from the government, and another one I can't remember. At least 5 big ads, and you think, well, there's something happening here. And this was perhaps anticipated by the Decade of Education and Sustainable Development. It's been running since 2005, which Jan referred to. And, okay, if NGOs, government, companies are responding, and the public to some extent, in a rising consciousness, you have to ask where is HE in all this? And is that a fair characterisation? It wasn't a big mess because of the things people do with it. I'll do my bit to help it out, actually doing nothing. Well, maybe not, or maybe HE is partly out of his chair at this point. There is an international response, and I thought I'd just put this slide in. This came from a book which came across my desk a few weeks ago called Degrees of Matter. It's about the HE response to climate change. And it's from the introduction by the president of Charles University, which, as you may know, has a essential reputation on environmental work. I just thought it was a nice quote. And students as active, engaged, and effective citizens is his quote rather than mine. So there is an international response to these big issues. And to some extent, here too. Jan referred to the Green League, which just came out a couple of weeks ago from the People and Planet, which is a students' organisation, and St Andrews in Edinburgh in the top 15, as is Plymouth institution. Say that. Green Gowns Award, of course. South of the border, we've got the HEFP Strategic Review on Sustainable Development taking place at the moment, which I think will be quite a significant piece of work and an impetus to this taking this work forward in England. And I'm pleased to hear what's happening north of the borders today. But having said that, both surveys south of the border and the John Forster report here, we know that progress is patchy in terms of curriculum particularly, but also policies, campus development and so on. So this is where the Academy ESD project comes into play perhaps. It was initiated early in 2005 with the support of Forum for the Future, coincided with the headpiece Sustainable Development Policy, which came out in the same year. And the first job was to audit where things are and perceptions of people working in the field. And so 18 of the 24 subject centres took part in that audit, and that became known as the DOOR report, which came out in the same year, which you may have seen. And that, in a sense, gave the project its mandate. The purpose of the project is this: to help institutions and subject communities develop curricula and pedagogy that will give students the skills and knowledge to live and work sustainability. So we see the project as being a sort of facilitative mechanism to enable things to happen, if you like. There are three program areas, three things we're concentrating on: research and development, capacity building, and coordination and dissemination. Each of those has an aim, which gives us some structure. So there's the aims corresponding with those program areas. So what's happening? Can we support development, and can we coordinate and disseminate that work, basically, in a nutshell? We've approached this by a whole range of projects in the past year and a half or so. Research has been taken forward, commissioned Forum for the Future to do what we call policy roadmaps in the 4 countries. What's happening, what are the policy structures to support this work in higher education. We've also commissioned an organisation called Student Forces Sustainability based in the East Midlands to look at both employers and students' perceptions of views on sustainability and the demand for sustainability in higher education. And that both those pieces of work are virtually complete. And you'll see a lot of reference to July. July is sort of a magic month for us because it's our conference, and we're pressing everybody who's done work for the project to be up and ready to deliver in July. So that's when all this stuff will come together. Alex Ryan, freelance, and Colin Brooks, retired academic, have been working with us to do what we call solo HEI events, where they go into an institution, started with UEA, University of East Anglia, and had a very interesting day, which was carefully planned in advance of us walking the front door and talk to staff about SD. It was planned in terms of getting a fair representation from top to the bottom of the university hierarchy, if you like this way, but also horizontally across the university to talk about where the university is and where the links are and where the gaps are and so on and so forth. And that's quite an interesting experiment. And out of that, we'll take a look forward in other institutions, Gloucestershire's coming up, and others will be in train. The same pair, Alex and Colin, have also been working on interdisciplinary seminars where the academies work on interdisciplinarity and our work on sustainability come together. And they have sort of running 3 seminars with, I think, about 3 months between them. And really going into some depth about what were the links between sustainability and interdisciplinarity. And these reports will be again on our website soon. In addition to those, we have networking events, which I mentioned in East Midlands last year in March in South West, now today Dundee. Heather particularly has been very involved in community projects involving those institutions in Thornbury, which is just north of Bristol. That is now in the writing up stage, and University of Gloucester is taking inspiration from that project, taking it forward. Part of our funding has gone to subject centres and other HCIs working with subject centres. So we've funded 12 projects from HCIs, as it says there, across 13 disciplines. July date there again. And 3 new projects funded in Scotland, just been funded, which I'll say a little bit more about in a second. Quick plug for the conference. It looks like that in your pack. At Ecoversity in Bradford, and out of that we want to get a special issue of the Journal of Environmental Application Research on these people submitting there. And I'll say a little bit about the conference at the end, because I think it's a significant event for us. Okay, there's the 3 Scottish grant projects. St Andrews, which Jan's heading up, here in Dundee, and Stirling. And the third one will be sent today. So if you want to know about the third one, it's going to be a workshop. Okay, the project works with other leading players. Apple Plymouth, which I shall get a shot when I get back. Plymouth worked for the Centre for Sustainable Futures at Plymouth 3 days a week, for the project 2 days a week. And both Plymouth and Kingston have kettle money, Centres for Teaching and Learning money for 5 years. Both institutions really pushing the sustainability agenda. To say more about that. Also, Bradford's Ecoversity, where the conference will be held, and again, quite innovative work happening in Bradford. So partly we're trying to link together leading organisations and players in the field. So we've had a very informal meeting of Kingston, Gloucestershire, Plymouth, Bournemouth, Leadership Foundation, EAUC, Form for the Futures. Not in any exclusive club, but if people are really involved, let's get together and talk about things. And we're trying to facilitate that. Next meeting will be in conjunction with the conference in July. As resources become available, we're putting reports of our initiatives become available. That's going onto our website. There's an official HE Academy website, but also we're entering into partnership with EAUC. They are launching their own new website, and they're going to have some dedicated pages on that website, which we can update quickly. And then you can also look at individual subject centres' website to see what they're doing in the ESG field. The subject centres, 17 or 18 subject centres are involved in ESD work in one way or another. I'll say just a little bit about that in a second. My own work, I'm charged as part of my post with the Centre for Sustainable Futures is to work on generic module, which is almost done. Learning and teaching framework to support academics wanting to get into this area, and the sustainability policy, which Plymouth is actually now just about just needs ticking off by the Board of Governors, really, but it's gone through the whole consultative process in the university, and we're going to make that available to anybody who wants to use that as some kind of inspirational or model. So there's been an intentional overlap between my work for Plymouth and my work for the Academy ESG project. These are a few examples of past and recent work by the centres, and you can check them, as I said, on what they're doing by looking at their websites. A lot of this work has been in a sort of formative stage of the last year and a half or so. A lot will be coming through in the stream onto the websites, and in particular, we will have, I think, quite an exciting conference in Bradford, which may be the fast house to you, which is far north from me being in Plymouth, centre of the country. And I think a lot will be made evident there about exactly what the project's been doing in detail. And it's going to be a very interactive and exchange-based event rather than listening to people from the front of the event. So do come to that if you're interested. Got any other questions? Possible new directions. These are things we hope to do in the next year. Taking the work forward, building on what we've done to date. Self-explanatory, I think. If you've got questions, talk to me or Simon or Heather. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, hopefully there'll be plenty of chance to discuss during lunchtime, and we've also allocated some time at the end of the event if people want to stay around and chat and have coffee to the event. Okay, we're going to be going off into parallel sessions now. Can I just ask if you do find a room and it's kind of full, if you can kind of go to another one, and knowledge that you can go to that one in the afternoon, that would be great, so we don't kind of imbalance in the numbers too much. Okay, well, thanks very much for listening this morning. I hope you've enjoyed the start of this, and hope you enjoy the next two sessions with lunch in between, and then we'll come together for a plenary later on this afternoon. Thank you very much. Yes.
This is the suite. Key suite. There, art gallery. For Paul Simon. Big umbrella.
How many of us can fit in the lift? Okay.
Upstairs, reception, yeah.